also heard that this has nothing to do with Islam from our friends at CARE. And these are obviously two very different views of Islam. ISIS certainly believes that they are doing everything in accordance with Islam. You wouldn't go out dying for it if you didn't believe it. Liars make poor martyrs is the general rule. And yet we are assured from Muslim organizations like CARE and Islam that none of this has anything to do with Islam. And Mike just quoted President Obama as well. We'll look at two important quotations. One absolutely is amazing to me. But the first, of course, from President Barack Obama. Now let's make two things clear. ISIL is not Islamic. No religion condones the killing of innocents, and the vast majority of ISIL's victims have been Muslim. Notice the two reasons given here that ISIS cannot be Islamic. One, killing innocents, and two, the victims are Muslim. Many of the victims are Muslims. And ISIL certainly is not a state. ISIL is a terrorist organization, pure and simple, and it has no vision other than the slaughter of all who stand in its way. So the Islamic State is neither Islamic nor a state, according to our president. One more here. This one is a brilliant quotation. Everyone should study this one very carefully. It's by another politician. He's a British politician. He is a liberal, very liberal, Muslim politician named Majid Nawaz. And he says, "We Muslims must admit there are challenging Quranic passages that require reinterpretation today. Let us use existing tools of exegesis, such as specificity, restriction, abrogation, and metaphor. Vacuous literalism as an interpretive method must be abandoned. It is bankrupt. Only by rejecting vacuous literalism are we able to condemn, in principle, ISIS-style slavery, beheading, lashing, amputation, and other medieval practices forever, all of which are in the Quran. This is a struggle within Islam. Reformers either win and get religion-neutral politics, or lose and get ISIL-style theocracy." Notice the difference here. Groups like CARE or President Obama, this has nothing to do with Islam. This is the opposite of Islam. Islam condemns this. And here you have someone saying, this is exactly what you get in the Quran. Think about this. There's a struggle within Islam. Reformers either win, so it has to be reformed. The reformers either win or you lose. And what happens if you don't reform? What happens if you don't reinterpret? You end up with ISIL-style theocracy. So if you don't reform the teachings, if you don't reinterpret them, you get ISIS. So the question here is ISIS un-Islamic or is it too Islamic? Right? So the president and CARE, it's un-Islamic. ISIS is un-Islamic. And here's a guy saying, no, they're just taking this way too seriously here. They're following it literally down to the letter. But notice, he's admitting that all of this comes directly from the Quran. They just aren't reforming it as he would like. Now, I happen to agree with Majid here that if you take the Quran that seriously, you get ISIS, you get the Islamic State. I have my doubts about whether it can be reformed and reinterpreted, mostly because of what the Quran actually says. But this is an extremely important point that most people can't get their minds around, that, regardless of how much CARE is saying that this has nothing to do with Islam, and not just President Obama, but almost politicians almost across the board saying that this has nothing to do with Islam. Every media outlet, this has nothing to do with Islam. Muslim organizations all over the place, all kinds of people saying this has nothing to do with Islam. People are still converting and running over to the Middle East and joining ISIS. So why are they not listening to everyone telling them that this has nothing to do with Islam? The only explanation I find when I read articles about this or watch reports about this is these people were radicalized somehow. They don't say radicalized by Islam. You can't say that. They can't say you were radicalized by the Quran or radicalized by the Hadith. So they say they were radicalized online. Now, to get our minds around this, we're going to have a little game here. I'm going to try to radicalize all of you. So you need to pretend that you're Muslims. Don't worry, it's just a thought exercise, right? Pretend that you're sort of Muslims who grew up in the West and you had nice parents who aren't trying to wage jihad against anyone. They taught you that Islam is good. You pray your 5 daily prayers. You go to the mosque. You maybe even fast during Ramadan. But you would never think about killing anyone. You have Christian friends. You have a couple of Jewish friends. And unless the topic is Israel, you get along with them. So imagine you're in that situation. Or imagine you're a recent convert to Islam. Someone has come up to you and convinced you Quran is a book of scientific miracles. So it must have come from Allah. So you need to believe in what it says, and people actually convert based on this. So assume that that's the situation you're all in, and all of a sudden you start getting messages from somewhere. And it's someone trying to tell you, hey, you think you're about to live life as a Muslim by going to school for a while, getting a job, picking up a family along the way, living out your life, retiring. If you think that's how you're supposed to live as a Muslim, I've got some things to tell you. So imagine that's the situation you're in, and we're going to see why people become radicalized. And if you spot any flaws along the way, let me know, because as far as I can tell, this is airtight. Let's talk about the clarity of the Quran very briefly. Look at a bunch of references. There are far, far more than this. I just picked a bunch. Chapter 6, verse 114. Shall I seek for a judge other than Allah when He it is who has sent down to you the book fully explained? The Quran is fully explained. It's self-explained here. Chapter 11, verse 1. This is a book whose verses have been made firm and free from imperfection, and then they have been expounded in detail. Are there any imperfections in the Quran? Chapter 12, verse 1. These are verses of the clear book. Is the Quran unclear? Let's look at some more. 1689. And we have sent down to thee the book explaining all things. 2446. Certainly we have revealed clear communications, and Allah guides whom He pleases to the right way. 27.1. These are verses of the Quran, a book that makes things clear. It's not here to confuse you, it's here to make things clear. 41.3. A book whereof the verses are explained in detail. 57.9. He it is who sends down clear communications upon His servant, that He may bring you forth from utter darkness into light. Allah brags throughout the Quran that it's perfectly clear. His revelations are clear. His commands are clear. Allah had all eternity, right? Because keep in mind, this is a different view of revelation from, let's say, the Bible, or just almost any other religion. In the Bible, it has human authors who are inspired. So it makes sense to say, what situation was that human author dealing with? Who's he trying to respond to here? What were the things that the situation? Allah's word is not like that. It's eternal. It's eternal. Allah had all eternity to say exactly what He meant. So, as good Muslims now, do you get to then come along and say, Allah says this, but I think He really meant something that lines up with the Constitution of the United States or the Bill of Rights or something? Do you get to reinterpret Allah's perfectly clear commands in that way? You don't get to reinterpret it. If you say what He really means is something different, you're saying you're more clear than Allah. You can say something, you can tell Allah what He really means, and you're a better communicator than Allah, who brags throughout His book that it's perfectly clear. So, no reinterpretation here. Allah means what He says. If you reinterpret it, you're accusing Him of not being as clear as He claims. Islam means submission. And most people wouldn't have any problem with the idea of submission to God. I believe that I'm created by God, that I'm sustained by God. If you say, David, you need to submit to God, of course I do. But when Muslims go out and preach us, hey, we're the religion of submission to God. You believe in God, don't you? Don't you want to submit to God? It's not the end of the story. Islam is about how you submit to Allah. The correct way to submit to Allah. And you submit to Allah by obeying, without question, whatever Allah and Muhammad say. So it's how you are going to submit to God. And we'll look at how much wiggle room you have as a Muslim to reinterpret them, or to reinterpret Allah's commands and kind of do something else if you don't like what He says. Chapter 33, verse 36. It is not for a believer, so if you're a real believer, it is not for a believer, man or woman, when Allah and His Messenger have decreed a matter, that they should have any option in their decision. And whoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger, he has indeed strayed in a plain error. So, if Allah and His Messenger, if Allah or Muhammad tell you what to do you have an option? Nope. You can say, I don't think that's what it really means. Wait a minute, Allah's word is perfectly clear, right? You can't say, well, that's not what He meant, so I'm not going to do it. And once you understand that He means exactly what He says, He means exactly what He commands you, you don't get to say, well, I just don't want to do that. According to that, it's not for a believer, not a real believer, if you do that. Let's look at another one. This one's cooler. Chapter 4, verse 65. But no, by your Lord, they can have no faith. You have no faith. They can have no faith until they make you, O Muhammad, judge in all disputes between them, and find in themselves no resistance against your decisions, and accept them with full submission. Part of submitting to Allah is submitting to Muhammad. Notice, you have no faith until you make Muhammad the judge in all disputes, and you have no resistance against his decisions. If Muhammad says you can have sex with a 9-year-old girl, and you find some resistance in yourself against it, I don't think that's right, not a real Muslim yet. You have to submit fully. No resistance against Muhammad's decisions. That's when you really believe. So think about the psychological impact this would have. Anything anyone is telling you, anything you're reading about Muhammad, that Muhammad said, if you're doubting any of this, it's constantly, am I a real believer? Am I a real believer here? And one of the decisions of Allah is you have a pattern of conduct here. Chapter 33, verse 21, certainly you have in the Apostle of Allah an excellent exemplar for him who hopes in Allah and the latter day remembers Allah much. So Allah says, pattern your life after someone, it's Muhammad. So you have to obey all of Muhammad's decisions. Muhammad is the pattern of conduct for Muslims. So now that you realize that you're only a true believer if you have no doubt, you have no resistance against Muhammad's decisions, well, now you know that if you're going to maintain that you are Muslim, you have to do exactly what Allah says. So, what is Allah saying? What does Muhammad say? Well, here's the example you have from Muhammad, since Allah declares you have to follow Muhammad's example. Sahih al-Bukhari, 2797, the Prophet said, by him in whose hands my soul is, I would love to be martyred in Allah's cause, and then come back to life, and then get martyred, and then come back to life again, and then get martyred, and then come back to life again, and then get martyred. Just based on this one little passage here. Who is more obedient to Allah's command to imitate Muhammad, to obey all of Allah's decisions, to obey Muhammad's decisions? Who's patterning himself more after Muhammad? The nice Muslim who lives down the street from you, or ISIS? That sounds, I mean, what ISIS fighter wouldn't say exactly that? Now why? Why does Muhammad want to die so much? Sahih al-Bukhari, 2795, the Prophet said, nobody who dies and finds good from Allah in the hereafter would wish to come back to this world, even if he were given the whole world and whatever is in it, because you get all kinds of virgins and stuff. Would wish to come back to this world, even if you were given the whole world and whatever is in it, except the martyr, who, on seeing the superiority of martyrdom, would like to come back to the world and get killed again. Once you see what you have in paradise, this is what is being taught to Muslims. Once you see what you get in paradise, there is nothing in this world that would make you want to come back to it. The entire world, if it were given to you, you wouldn't even think about coming back for everything in this world. The only exception is the martyr, because he realizes how great it is to be a martyr, so he would want to come back. How important is jihad? How important is martyrdom? And we can't figure out why these guys are going out and blowing themselves up. Who's the pattern of conduct here? Muhammad. This guy is the guy who makes the decisions for you. This is the guy who's the pattern of conduct for you. Allah says, this is the guy you pattern your life after. And if you do not obey all of his decisions mindlessly, if you have any resistance against his decisions, you're not a real Muslim. So decide right now whether you're a real Muslim.